Hi, in this video we're going to be talking about a couple of contingency theories. Contingency theories are theories that take into account something about the leader, usually either their traits or behaviors, and also something about the situation. So they're looking at something about the leader plus the situation equals an understanding of what makes an effective leader. The first theory we're going to address is Fiedler's model. Fiedler's model takes into account something about the leader, which happens to be what they view as a trait. They believe that leaders are either focused on tasks or focused on relationships. You can't change them. So if a particular leader doesn't fit well with a situation, then you just need to look for a different leader. So that's kind of their approach. And then they also take a look at something about the situation. So let's take a look at what this least preferred coworker questionnaire looks like. That's how they determine whether a leader is more task or relationship oriented. So these are some sample questions that can be used to determine whether a leader is more task or relationship oriented. So if you were to think of a coworker out of all the coworkers you ever worked with that you least preferred to work with. So if you think of this coworker and you answer the questions with more positive terms, so your responses when you do all the addition ends up being more towards the end of pleasant and supportive and loyal and things of that nature, then that means, according to this, that you're relationship oriented, because in a situation that was difficult, you looked at a way of making the most of working with someone who might be difficult to work with. By contrast, if you answer this questionnaire in terms of how this least preferred person, least preferred coworker is unfriendly, is backbiting, is tense, in that way of describing them, that would show, according to this, that you are more task-oriented. So you are focused on those goals and those deadlines, and that person is just getting in the way of all that. So that determines whether you're task or relationship-oriented, so you know something about the leader. But this theory looks at the situation, totally separate from the leader. So let's take a look at the situation. So you want to imagine something about the situation. So let's take a look, for example, at, let's say it's a military leadership position that needs to be filled. So you would say, well, for leaders that in a military context, they typically have to earn trust and respect by making their way up the ladder of promotions, and they have to work pretty darn hard to get there. So in that situation of trying to find a military leader, you would think, unless it's an unusual one, that in general this particular one that we're looking at is pretty typical, let's say, and therefore you would think there would be good leader-member relations in this particular situation that you're trying to fill this position. Also, you would think that this military leadership situation also seems to have high position power. If a military leader in general, we don't have one in mind specifically right now, we're trying to fill a position, but typically if someone is a military leader, they want to tell someone to do a whole lot of push-ups, a whole lot of pull-ups, run a couple miles, they have that power as part of their position. They have authority. So they would have a high position power. And then lastly, task structure. Usually in a military leadership situation, there are certain procedures that you need to follow. The task is structured. It's not like, hey, go out there and let's dream up a new way randomly of how to attack this enemy. There is a procedure that you would be following. So overall, we're talking about good leader-member relations, strong position power, and strong task structure. So if we take that situation and take a look at putting it together in the next slide here, you can see that what I just described with that military leader is on that far left side there. If you look at the bottom, category 1 says good leader-member relations, high task structure, strong position power. That was just like I described with the military leadership situation. So according to this, for this leadership position we're trying to fill in the military, we would look up and say, well, of course we want good performance. So this, if you just follow that category 1 all the way up to the top of the slide, you can see that dotted line that they're saying for good performance in this this good, high, strong situation, we would want a task-oriented leader. That's what would be best. That makes sense, right? I mean, if you think about a military leadership situation, we typically would think that that makes sense, that you would want a task-oriented leader, someone focused on those goals and deadlines and getting the job done over really like focusing on getting to know people very personally and focusing on the more relationship side of getting things done. All right, so that's what it says there. Now let's take a look at the far other end of this spectrum, at a totally different situation. The poor, low, weak situation, category 8. So what this is saying is, let's imagine that we're talking about some company that's just been plagued by corporate scandal. Like someone went in and just completely did a poor job with finances, and they're going to the courts, they're corrupt, it's just a total and utter mess. People are worrying about losing their jobs. What a disaster. So that's the situation, but let's take a look specifically. So we're trying to get a new leader in there. Someone's going to come in and be the new leader for this organization that's been plagued with problems. Well, because of the problems that they've been having, people are going to be skeptical and cynical about leadership. So in terms of having trust and respect for leaders, it's not there right now. It's poor leader-member relations in this situation. In terms of task structure, well, there's not going to be an exact way of like how are we going to proceed? What's the way that we're going to actually get the task done now? Some of that might be thrown out the window. There's not like a clear way, since there has been all these disasters in the company. So there's low task structure currently. And then in terms of position power, well, a leader can certainly try to demand things of people. And again, because people are cynical and skeptical of leaders due to the situation that they're in, there's weak position power currently in that situation. So according to this theory, we go up again. This is the far right side. We move up and we say, hey, if we want good performance, look, guess what? This theory says we want a task-oriented leader. So interesting, right? Both in favorable situations and in unfavorable situations. The two far ends of this spectrum. Task-oriented leaders are what is needed according to this theory. Interesting. But then in the mid-range, what they call the moderate situations, where there's kind of a mixture, good and poor and high and weak, just a whole hodgepodge, where there's just not like a clear kind of indication of the kind of situation it is. It's not entirely good or entirely bad. That's where relationship-oriented leaders can come in and make a difference. So you can think about it this way. If the situation already demands it's favorable and it already is positive in all these ways, and there's already a lot of like kind of structure provided and confidence provided in the leader in that situation, then just kind of being consistent with that and being task oriented is something that's effective. On the other hand, if the situation is unfavorable in the sense of it's a disaster, there's not a lot of structure provided and confidence, and it's tough, then a leader needs to come in and provide that structure and provide the task orientation that's going to compensate for the weakness in that situation. But if there is a mixture, that's the opening for a relationship-oriented leader to come in and to still get things done, but to do so through more of the trust and more of the building of relationships that you might see. So again, don't forget that this model says that if you were to assess the situation in a certain way, and according to this, you need a task-oriented leader, and the leader you were thinking about for that position is relationship-oriented leader, this theory would say, don't plan on having that leader change. Just go shop around for a new leader. Find one that's task-oriented. So that's something interesting to note. Let's take a look now at one other contingency theory. We're going to talk about the situational leadership theory. And what this does is it says, let's take a look at two attributes of followers. Let's take a look at how able a follower is to do something and also how willing they are. So this is considered contingency theory because it's looking at something to do with both people involved and also to do with something about the situation, which you could think of as a level of motivation within a particular situation. And it also kind of says how a leader needs to kind of address how they're going to change their leadership accordingly. All right, so what this says is let's start off with a situation in which the follower is both able and willing. So has the ability, also has the motivation, able and willing. So in that situation, what a leader doesn't need to do much. There's not a need to supervise, there's not a need to have to support as much, so a leader can kind of just take a step back more. But on the other hand, if it goes the far other extreme, if a follower is not able and not willing, they're lacking in both those, then that's where a leader needs to step in and provide both supervision and support, right? You need to kind of compensate for what's going on in that situation. Now let's look at the in-between situations. What if a follower is unable and unwilling? Sorry, I already said that. Unable and willing. So if a follower is unable and is actually willing to do it, but just unable, then what happens is you don't have to deal with the motivational side as much, but you're going to have to provide some level of supervision to compensate for the follower's inability. By contrast, if someone is able, the followers are able, they have the ability, but they're unwilling, they don't have the motivation, then that's where a leader's going to need to come in and be more motivational. They're going to have to help with motivation, with support, and in order to compensate for that situation. All right, thanks for listening. I'll see you again soon.